Welcome to the Inconvenient Minority Podcast. I am your host, Kenny Hsu. Joining me today is popular commentator Greg Foreman. Greg is a North Carolina-based political commentator. His YouTube channel has many thousands of subscribers, so go follow Greg now. But you didn't really plan on getting into this YouTube space, right? You work in financial markets. You work as an investor. Tell us about kind of what you do as a day job.
Yeah, so I didn't plan on getting into this YouTube space. I was in the corporate world before I dived into this. I was actually working on a startup before I got into this. But, you know, with everything that was going on last year in terms of the George Floyd stuff, Breonna Taylor, Black Lives Matter, seeing what was going on in this country with the election coming up, I decided I wanted to kind of put my voice out there, right? Politically. Now, when that happened, I just started, making videos on YouTube, put my opinions out there, and it just kind of blew up. And it basically, this became my full-time thing because of just how popular that it got. But yes, I mean, before I started doing this, I was working in the financial services industry. And like I said, it's financial literacy and finance has always been kind of a passion of mine. But I working in the corporate world was not a passion of mine. So, I decided to
Right.
leave and to try to go out and kind of do my own thing. And it's just kind of led to this.
So, so your YouTube channel is called The Black Conservative Perspective, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And so I was talking with you before this podcast, and I thought you had such an interesting perspective because, I guess some people would consider it like an achievement to work in finance, to work in financial markets, especially someone like you who grew up kind of in a distinctly middle class family. Your dad was a police officer. Your mom was a teacher. But I think the people on my podcast, we've always been interested on three things: race, identity, and culture. And so tell us a little bit about the way that you grew up and that your parents managed money and how that either convinced or inspired you to go in a different direction.
Yeah. So when I grew up, I actually grew up in the rural part of North Carolina. Okay. So I grew up in a place where there was a one stop light in the town. There was hog farms, right? It was pretty isolated. Okay. But what I watched is that my parents work very, very hard, right? They work hard to try to create a life for us, right? My dad didn't graduate from high school, but he did go back and get his GED, and then he did go to 4-year college. And after that, he became a police officer. He went into law enforcement. My mom, again, she also went into college with my dad at the same time. They basically have been a duo, right, in terms of trying to get a better life for me and my brother. So what ended up happening was that my dad had ended up getting a job in another part of the state, in Greensboro. That was kind of a better opportunity for us. And then when I was in middle school, we ended up moving to that different part of the state. And then from there, that's when I just kind of got exposed to more perspectives and different things in life. And as I got older and I went to college, I started to realize, like, for as much as my parents worked hard, what they were missing to a certain extent was kind of the management of, like, finances and kind of an understanding of financial literacy. And this happened because during college I had the opportunity to volunteer for a financial literacy startup in New York City that really piqued my interest in terms of what that what that entails. So the more I started to learn about it, the more I started to learn about how um you know even though my parents worked really hard, there was more that they could do in regards to creating a generational wealth, right? Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, we live in a middle class neighborhood. We have, again, a decent quality of life is nothing, is nothing I'm really wanting for. But at the same time, looking at their habits and what they've done, even though they've done a lot, okay, they've come up a lot, versus some of the other friends that I've made and what their parents do in regards to money and stuff like that. It's different, right? And being exposed to that and having that interest led me to work in the financial services industry for a few years and really kind of get a grasp on kind of how building generational wealth works.
Interesting. So there's a lot here to break down, but if I could summarize it and just correct me if I'm wrong. So your father grew up in a family without a college degree, right?
Yep.
And he worked so you describe your father as very hardworking. He was comparatively ambitious. He decided he was going to go get his GED.
Yep.
And then he became a police officer.
He got a GED, then went to college.
Then went to college.
Yep,
Yeah, then went to college.
Yep.
For what?
Criminal justice.
For criminal justice. Then he became a police officer.
Yep.
And then he married your mother and he raised you kind of in rural North Carolina. And so you would say your father had distinctly like middle class aspirational values, would you say?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But the missing piece that you think prevented your father from creating generational wealth, even though he had all of the aspirational values of working really hard, putting in long hours, being ambitious, taking responsibility for his family and everything. The thing that you felt that sort of prevented him from moving into that next strata of life, that upper middle class generational wealth, generational legacy life, was his lack of financial sense.
To a certain extent, that sounds really strong, and I don't really like saying that about my parents, but
Okay,
I do feel like to a certain extent that having not as a strong grasp on kind of how money works, right, and us living in a debt driven society, I think is kind of what has hindered not just them but just also other people as well too. I mean, just generally from moving up into the upper middle class.
Right. So how do you feel like people in your community viewed debt?
Well, so I think that a lot of people kind of view debt as free money, even though it's not. Right? They don't feel like, oh, they have to pay it back. They don't understand, interest rates, and that's basically the cost of borrowing money. So, and because debt is so easily attainable, right? We can easily go out and get debt. People, I think, have lived lifestyles that are over leveraged, right? People live above their means instead of below their means. And because of that, I think what happens is that is one of the things that hinders people from becoming middle class and then going to upper middle class, or even, from becoming from leaving the poor, from being poor to becoming middle class.
Did your parents invest in stocks in the stock market?
No. That's something.
No, and they didn't invest in the stock market either.
Nope, they don't invest in the stock market because they don't know anything about it.
But they invested in home equity, right? They bought a house.
Yes, that's the only thing they did know.
Okay. And has that appreciated for them? Has that provided returns for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're about to sell the house right now during this hot housing market. Now, they're also trying to buy another house, but I've told them, like, we're at the top of the market. Like, you probably should wait a little bit to buy another house, but I can't really, speak too much on that.
So, got it. This is interesting. One thing that I hear, not one thing that I hear, one thing that I know based on the objective evidence and data is that Black Americans are more likely to rent than to buy. Why do you think that that's the case?
Well, in terms of renting versus buying, I'm not. That's actually a good question. I honestly really don't know why that is the case. I mean, maybe some people will say, well, it's because of a historical lack of access to the housing market with redlining and stuff like that. Some people can say that's what it is, right?
Uh-huh.
But honestly, I honestly just think that it's just a lack of just, again, understanding the wealth building potential of home ownership versus
Uh-huh.
renting, right? And some people may find that owning a home is unattainable, right? Where I'm from, the rural part of North
Yeah.
Carolina, a lot of people see home ownership as well. I own a trailer, right? But see, the problem with that
Huh.
is that those trailers, those double wide trailers, they tend to depreciate in value, right? Because
Right.
they're, not made very well. So it's not even
Right.
like even the homes that you are buying, right? They're depreciating in value. Well, I'm just speaking on rural North Carolina, put it that way.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things that I think, in my opinion, from my experience, I just think that it is just a lack of understanding how building equity works when it comes to renting versus buying a house.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then it's funny because people think that renting, I mean, at the same time, there's an argument to be made for why you should rent over buying at certain stages of your life. Like, for example, I'm pretty young. And if I bought a house right now where my career isn't yet completely settled, if I move, then I have to pay all sorts of assortments of fees. So it may not be the best decision for me to rent right now. In fact, renting is a modern artifact. It is because we have a modern economy, people can sort of rent, and there are certain standards towards renting, and you can sort of pay people on time and get paid on time if you're a landlord. I mean, so that actually is something that is a modern creation that you could argue that Black Americans take more advantage of, which is good. But at the same time, ultimately, it's not the way that you can build wealth in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unless I feel like you're renting for the purpose of saving, right, to eventually buy a house, then that, I mean, in my opinion, that it would make sense. But for the most part, I find that when I was living in Charlotte, there's a lot of people that are, living in these super expensive apartments. And I'm like, I know that a lot of you guys aren't making all that much money. Like, you're like, you're not really building you're not building towards anything, right? You are working, right? And then you're buying these expensive apartments. Oh, well, not buying them, but you're renting them. And then what happens is that you get a raise, right? And then you go and you get a more expensive place. You've never really saved money to actually buy a home, which is why we're seeing home ownership rates go down so much, right? People just don't, they're not buying homes and they're not starting families because we're not in a position financially to actually do that. I think that there is a huge problem in general when it comes to financial literacy in this country, and I see it almost every single day.
Where do you see it?
Yeah, just seeing how people my age, what they do, right, in terms of how they live their life versus how I live my life. And I think that the vast difference is that I'm building towards the future, right? I'm being super frugal and I'm building towards the future. These other people, I can't say these other people, but other people I'm saying that's my age to graduate college. I'm like, that's in similar positions and work similar jobs or whatever. I'm like, you guys aren't really thinking about building towards the future. You're really just thinking about now, right? And the part of that I feel like is the whole renting aspect, especially in a place where you have a lot of elevated rent prices like Charlotte. That's, I mean, I find it. I'm about to move back to Charlotte, which is why I'm like kind of on this right now. I'm like, it's ridiculous. It's how expensive it is. I might as well buy a house, right? Like I might or buy a condo, right? I might as well. That's literally what I'm thinking. I'm like, why would I rent? I should buy a condo and pay less, right? So
Yeah, but condo, you don't get much autonomy in the condo. If you buy
yeah,
a
no,
single family, you get more.
yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. I don't know if I necessarily want a house yet. I'm kind of a small space type of person, but yeah, I'm just saying like I'm going through that decision making process right now, and it's made me think about like, wow, how does all these other people I know, how how are they doing this? So
So
yeah.
tell us then tell us about your experience then working in the financial services industry, first of all, what was your role? What did you do?
Yeah. So when I initially entered the financial services industry, my role was I worked at Vanguard as a investment professional, and then after that, and all that position is I essentially help people basically manage their money, right? Figure out what they want to invest in. If they call, they say, hey, I want to invest in this stock or that stock. I essentially would help them facilitate that transaction or tell them, give them a conversation about what's suitable for them and what they should be thinking about investing in when it comes to their, their goals and their aspirations. After that, I moved up in 1 year to the personal advisory department where I actually work directly with the financial advisors to help manage money for our high net worth clients. And at Vanguard, they consider high net worth to be over $1 million. So we was working with high net worth advisors to help manage money for the clients there. So essentially, again, my background is more kind of the whole financial planning aspect of investments and things like that.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess in your experience then, what were people did you work with clients, I guess, from your rural part of North Carolina?
No, I
No.
didn't work with any clients from the rural part of the state. But
So
you can definitely.
you worked with pretty rich did you work with pretty rich clients?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what's the difference between how these rich people spend their money compared to how the people in your rural part of North Carolina, the poorer middle class people spend their money?
Well, the difference is that it's very simple. Rich people spend their money on appreciating assets that, again, either appreciate in value or generate income. Poor people, well, poor, I would say, or middle class or whatever, right? They tend to spend money on things that depreciate in value and don't generate income. Okay, and also, they people that are more high net worth, they also tend to be more entrepreneurial, right? They tend to own businesses. They just tend to just have different habits and a different understanding of money, especially when it comes to the time value of money. I think that that's kind of a concept that a lot of people really don't understand, and I think that that's one of the main differences between um the high net worth individuals I work with, and even people. I didn't always work with high net worth individuals. I work with people that didn't have that much money, right? The difference between what was understood and why they were doing what they were doing, it's stark, right? It was a vast difference, and that's something I picked up on, and I've internalized that.
Now, so let me give you a couple of statistics here to kind of corroborate or add to what you're saying. So I found this 2017 Nielsen report found that compared to white women, black women were 14% more likely to own a luxury vehicle, 16% more likely to purchase costume jewelry, 9% more likely to purchase fine jewelry. A similar Nielsen report from 2013 found that while only 62% of all Americans owned a smartphone, 71% of blacks owned one. Moreover, all of these spending differences were unconditional on wealth and income. Now, our listeners are sophisticated enough to understand that these habits are not because one is white or one is black, but because people were raised in different cultural environments. But do you see value to these kinds of numbers? Do you see that reflected in your own experience?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, where I'm from growing up,
Mhm.
it was a badge of honor, kind of, oh, you got the new car with the rims, right? Like buying a new car and then putting rims on the car was some type of like accomplishment. And I cringe. I cringe anytime I see people celebrate. Two things I cringe. I cringe when people celebrate new cars, people that buy new cars, right? Even though right now with used car prices, it might not necessarily be a terrible decision to buy a new car. I'll give them that for right now. But that buying new cars and celebrating people having kids out of wedlock, I hate those two things, right? Those are two things that are my biggest pet peeves in regards to what I see people celebrating that I think is like basically an example of why people aren't moving up in when it comes to class and status.
Huh. Wait, so hold up here. You said that people celebrate having kids out of wedlock. Do you mean that? What do they do?
So what I mean is that, like, for example, somebody gets pregnant, the dad isn't in their life, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so happy for you. You know, let's throw you a baby shower." Blah 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 blah. Like, it's almost like it's not like they're celebrating them being out of wet. Like, I'm glad you had a kid out of wet. That's not. It's not that per se. It's just more of like, why is it that it's almost like people being rewarded for making bad decisions. Why is it you're getting a party and people, are saying nice things? It's like, you shouldn't really be, saying those type of things, right? You shouldn't be celebrating having your third child and you don't have a husband. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's not something that we should really be, incentivizing.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Okay, got it. That's what you mean. Yeah, so it's like you have a kid out of wedlock and people are throwing baby showers for you and everything like that, and not really paying attention to, hey, is the husband sticking around, or is he leaving? Is he heading out? What's going on? Where's the responsibility here? Right?
Exactly. And it's the exact same thing, again, how I feel about new cars. It's like people celebrate, oh, you got this new Dodge Charger or whatever, 2020. And it's like, you work at a restaurant. Like, you work at, like, a fast food restaurant. Again, I mean, look, hey, there's nothing wrong with working at a fast food restaurant. I'm just saying, like, you do understand that $30,000-$40,000 car that you're paying, $400, $500, $600 a month for, right? And interest on top of that. You do understand that money that you're spending can be used in a way that is going to appreciate over time. And also, you're not taking out a loan. But they don't understand that. They don't understand that money that they're putting into that new car is essentially going to depreciate to zero, right? I mean, theoretically, okay. So, and you're borrowing money, right? And you're paying interest. So, again, people celebrate that stuff as if that's like some sign of achievement, and it's not. Okay, like it's more of a sign of another bad financial choice that ultimately is not going to add anything to your life outside of the experience of saying that you have this new car.
Now, a liberal might listen to you and they might accuse you, I guess, of what they would call like blaming the victim or something like that. Like, this person is, you don't know what this person's going through and everything like that. Why are you blaming the victim for his or her own choices when you know the system is stacked against poor Black Americans like me? What would you say to that?
Well, I would put it like this. I don't know whether or not the system is truly stacked against poor Black Americans, but what I do know is that some people put more obstacles in their way than they actually need to because of the lack of financial literacy and understanding how money works, right? If you understand how money works, I think that's more than enough to overcome a vast majority of whatever obstacles may be in the way. Because look, who's been discriminated against in terms of getting into the financial markets, right? Yeah, you may have, again, some issues, right? You may or may not have some issues like, getting the job or whatever, right? Getting, the highest paying job or whatever. But again, even that, to a certain extent, if your skills are good enough, right, people are going to hire you. You're going to get a job, right? Like, if you put in the work, it doesn't matter what color. If anything, in today's time with affirmative action, there's plenty of opportunity out there, right? But what I'm saying is that ultimately, if you understand financial literacy, even if you don't necessarily have the best paying job, even if you don't necessarily have a fair shake, you still can overcome and move up just through understanding the power of money.
Do you believe that this economy is a fair shake, so to speak?
Yes and no, to a certain extent. I think that, so a lot of people on the left love to talk about the wealth gap, and I look at it like this. Yes, a ton of people last year during the pandemic, a ton of billionaires got richer, right? And a lot of poor people got poor. However, you got to be smart enough to realize how the game is played, right? You gotta be smart enough to realize that, okay, our federal government, they're not gonna let big business fail, right? They're not gonna let billionaires fail. And I acknowledge that, like, hey, it is what it is. But and when you understand that, then you understand where to put your money at, right? Like if you had invested at basically the bottom of the market last year, which had happened like March or something like that, everybody knew that the Congress was going to do a stimulus, that it was going to bail people out. Interest rates went to an all-time low. Money is the cheapest it's ever been. Everybody knew that, okay, this thing is going to be on steroids, and that's what happened. Okay. And so that's how the rich got richer. And that's something where, again, where financial literacy comes into play. You have to understand this stuff, what's going on in the markets, what's going on generally. That way you can take advantage of the same things that these rich people take advantage of. Obviously, you're not going to get the exact same benefits because they have more money, but you can take advantage of some of the quote unquote unfairness.
This is an interesting question now, because you worked in financial services, right? You knew that people offered loans, that your banks offered loans where you could put very little down payment but pretty high interest rates, on these kinds of things that could screw over these people in the long period of time. Do you think over a longer period of time, do you think that somehow these corporations are exploiting their customers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they definitely are.
Now you can go out and you can get a car loan, so if you don't have enough money to buy a car, you can still buy a car, but you're stuck with that later.
Yeah, well, that's essentially what happened in 2018 with the housing crisis, right? Where,
right,
they was giving out these loans, and then kind of putting all these loans together in these securities that they knew weren't as good as they were trying to sell to other people, right? And they actually, created other securities to bet against these collateralized mortgage obligations, CMOs, CDOs, collateralized debt obligations. That's what they call them. And there's people that made money off that, right? So yeah, I mean, listen, I understand that the financial services industry, there are people in it that are bad players, right? That are taking advantage of people. But that just goes to my point of why you need to be financially literate, why you need to understand this stuff so that you avoid being taken advantage of. And also on top of that, it comes down to also culture and what you value. It is hard for me to trick somebody into buying a or to get into some predatory loan to buy like a car or something like that. If I understand that, well, you know what, a car is a depreciating asset anyways. I'm not going to spend a lot of money on that. So I would never even be interested in a loan like that. Now, when it comes to housing and stuff like that, that might be a little bit different because everybody wants to live in a nice house. Everybody wants to live in a big house. So I get it. When it comes to trying to get a house, it might take a deeper level of knowledge to understand whether or not, somebody's trying to get over you. But essentially, I again, that just goes to show how important it actually is to be financially literate so that you understand these things and that you can take advantage of a lot of things that are out there,
Yeah,
like,
and there's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
And there's an argument to be made that if these banks didn't offer what some liberals would call predatory loans, that these same people would just go to loan sharks or payday loaners, who would take advantage of them even more.
Yeah, that's capitalism. I mean, people are going to take advantage of people. People are going to exploit people. Listen, the left loves to complain about that type of stuff. I'm cool with it because I mean, I'm to a certain extent, I'm not a.
Because as long as you're teaching these people, hey, this is what they could do to you.
Yeah, exactly. But to a certain extent, I'm somewhat of a social Darwinist, but not really. I wouldn't put that as my title, but I definitely believe that, like, there's just some people is like, they just, they just gonna be at the bottom, like, it is what it is. And that's why I was like, here's the difference between me and a lot of conservatives. A lot of conservatives they will defend capitalism and act like there's no downside, right? And I'm the type of person who I always tell my audience, guys, I'm a hardcore capitalist, right? I love capitalism. And I'll tell you, listen, do we have an inequality issue? Sure. But I think inequality is good. I think it's good that everybody's not equal. I think it's good that people have to compete. I think it's good that we have billionaires because ultimately that makes everybody's life better. And my argument is that the benefits of capitalism outweigh the negatives of capitalism. But I'm not going to sit here and act like they're not people that are going to get screwed over. They're not people that are going to be poor. They're not people that are going to get paid less than they deserve. Of course. But we live in a society where you got to compete, and there are just some people that have it and some people that don't, you know?
Yeah. Now, when you take on clients, do you emphasize that they should own a home?
Yeah. So the thing is that when I was working in financial services, we focused more on the financial markets. We focused more on stocks and bonds and stuff like that. But our advisors, they definitely got into the conversation about home ownership, right? We definitely took that into account in regards to their net worth, their assets that they have on their balance sheets. And that was always, again, kind of a part of it, right? We've helped facilitate people buying homes and walking through that decision with them. But that wasn't necessarily a major part of kind of the whole conversation. It was mainly about what they were doing in the markets.
Now, I say that because, there was this narrative in the Bush administration and the Clinton administration before, black home ownership, immigrant home ownership, everything like that. And we had this narrative where politicians were emphasizing, hey, you can own the American dream, own your own home, get equity, that kind of thing. And one consequence that some have seen is that it got people who really shouldn't be in the business of owning at least the kind of home that they eventually bought into the home ownership market, which, it then tended to inflate mortgages and, it came with a lot more risk. And when people stopped paying them off, that's when the housing market really crashed and exploded. So, so you wouldn't say home ownership is good at all times, right? At all costs.
No, it's not good at all costs. It's just like anything in life. I mean, if you have too much of it, then it's probably bad, right? So, I mean, yeah, if you obviously, get into this loan where there's like an adjustable rate where you get a low rate initially, and then after a couple years, that rate jacks up to a rate that you can't afford, which was what was happening to some people. Yeah, of course, like that's bad. But and like I said, I mean, that comes down on the banks, right? Who again then took these bad mortgages that it was given out and sold them to other people, knowing that it was bad. And that's just it created a domino effect that essentially all came down.
Right, exactly.
But then they got bailed out. So then it's like, what?
There you go. Government's not going to let them go down.
That's what I'm trying to and this is what I try to tell people, right? Like, if you understand the game, yes, the game is corrupt, but you got to understand the corruption. If you understand the corruption, then you can take advantage of it.
Yeah, you can buy into it.
People talk about, again, I'm not necessarily sure. I know on YouTube it's kind of, weird talking about this, but people talk about the vaccine. I'm like, look, whether you want to get the vaccine or not, I'm going to invest in these vaccine companies. I'm going to put my money in there because, again, whether or not I get it or not, whether or not I agree with it, I know that these companies are incentivized for people to keep getting the vaccine, right? That's why they have these booster shots. That's why they like, you need to be triple vaccinated. It's always about money, right? You know what I'm saying? So I'm like,
that makes a lot of sense.
You said what?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm like, you know what? If you understand that, instead of spending time either shilling for the vaccine or complaining about the vaccine, you can get the benefits by just, maybe investing in Moderna or Pfizer and taking advantage of the fact that, yes, there may be some corruption there in regards to how they're kind of pushing this vaccine. Just saying.
Okay. I guess last question for you then, Greg. You coming from the financial world, you being raised in a middle-class family, transitioning up, up the ladder and everything like that. And your conservative views, I think, are very important to share with the rest of the world. What do you hope to do with this platform that you've created for yourself, which now has, something like 100,000 subscribers on YouTube? What do you plan on doing this for? What is your ultimate purpose for it?
Well, I think that my initial purpose was just to kind of put my voice out there and just to have just put my opinion out there. But now that it's grown so big, I mean, I think really my purpose is to kind of fight back and push back against the victimhood narrative that a lot of people put on the Black community, first and foremost. And then also on top of that, just to be a voice for the conservative movement in regards to fighting back against this, like, I guess, movement from the Democrat Party to take us in a direction that's more closer to I would say like almost Chinese style authoritarianism to a certain extent, right? When it comes to the things that are being implemented and pushed from this party, right? The things that we're seeing being taught to us kids in class, the things that we're seeing on TV, there's a full blown culture war, right? And I think that a lot of that, the left says that, well, it's not that important. And I think it is important because I think culture is important. And I think that the Democrats and their policies, specifically in regards to the Black community, trying to dumb kids down, trying to push more welfare programs, right? Biden's trying to push this $3.5 trillion families plan that, really, again, seems to be more government intervention, more, hey, you know what? You need to depend on us so that you guys can continue to vote for us forever, right? And it's almost like the Democrats don't want to help anybody help themselves. They simply want to keep people dependent on them, therefore voting for them. And I think that that's, again, why you're seeing a lot of this stuff being pushed in our schools. It's like, oh, no, guys, don't focus on reading, writing, and math. You need to focus on LGBTQ and social justice, right? Like, George Floyd is your hero, not the military, not the Marines, not, anybody that's actually, positive contributors to the society. These other people are your heroes, right? People that, again, they're not people that you really want to live up to and aspire to be. So I think that, my platform moving forward, I think I just want to continue to just put out my opinion and just, really be a voice for, or a voice against the direction I believe that this country is going in, led by the left.
Yeah, I think that this is so important, especially in a time right now where in our education system, our public education system, many teachers, principals are celebrating a Black victimhood narrative, and are celebrating other victimhood narratives too. I mean, if you look in, at your school when you come in, there's a flag of George Floyd, and then this kind of thing, and a Black Lives Matter slogan there and everything like that. Like, why would you? I just even think latently, like subconsciously, to say that Black Lives Matter. It's like, did we ever doubt that? Was there not an assumption of that before? And so it's like you're almost like telling children the opposite by saying Black Lives Matter, by saying, oh yeah, there's the society didn't believe that. We actually have to espouse that now. I don't think that that's harmful. I don't think that that's helpful for these young children coming in trying to learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, if, like I said, if Black lives really matter, if these people really believe that, they should focus on reading, math, and writing, like the core subjects, so that people can learn some skills and get a job, right? Make money, right?
Yeah.
Also, at the end of the day, look, it's all about money. Everything is about money. Okay, like that's what it's about.
Says the financial analyst. Yeah,
yeah. Everything is about money. Okay. So at the end of the day, I would rather we focus on the money, and then the social aspect of it will clear itself up, right? If the Black community can economically prosper, then everything else will fall into place socially. I mean, I kind of got this ideology from Booker T. Washington in his approach to these social issues. He believed that, listen, let's focus on trades, let's focus on skills, let's focus on, basically being an economic powerhouse, and then the social stuff will come later. Now, W.E.B. Du Bois and the so-called talented 10th came a little bit later to try to change that narrative and to say, well, we're not satisfied with social progress so far. We need our, Ivy League educated Blacks to, get involved in politics and to try to change things that way. But it's like, no, that you listen, I'm not going to generalize here. Well, I'm going to generalize, but you can tell me whether I'm right or wrong or whatever. But I think that the Asian community has proved that you don't really need politics, right? Yeah. Like, you can just, you focus on business, focus on economics, focus on education, focus on culture and values, you can prosper. Once you got the money, all of a sudden now you're seeing more Asian people into politics, like Andrew Yang, right? Who's now into politics. You have some Indian people like, Bobby Jindal. You got the former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley. Like, that stuff comes once you have an established, like, kind of economic base, right? Like, where you have the money to and resources and the culture to run your own candidates, to have your own candidates that are going to do things in the best interest of, not just the country, but also your community as well. And I think that's what a lot of people are kind of missing. It's like, you got to get the economics first. If the economics is not there, the rest of the stuff really, it doesn't matter. It's really kind of BS in my opinion.
Oh, well, that's a good point. Fundamentally, your message, independence, not dependency, right? You have to start from that. You have to start from a base of independence. Then you can start moving into these other fields, the arts, politics, and those kinds of things like that. But if you try to capitalize off of politics first, maybe for a small minority of Black people, it's going to help them a lot in terms of income and everything like that. But you still haven't yet. You still haven't yet been able to coalesce the community around this kind of independent ideal and everything like that. And I'm just saying that for some people. For most people, I think agree with you and me, but the left is not preaching that narrative right now.
No, they're not. They want you to be involved in politics, and it's like, right. Politics is not. You don't need politics. It's a distraction, really.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great. Hey, Greg, it's great having you. Everybody check out Greg's YouTube channel, Black Conservative Perspective. I thought it was so important what he talks about, especially about financial literacy. As we discussed today, even just having financial literacy can add many thousands of dollars a year in income, not even active income, but passive income to you. And we're worried about the racial wealth gap. But you need to understand that wealth is exponential, right? So it's not even as hard as you think to get to the point where you are successful. If you can go from $1,000 to $1 million, it's the same leap between $1 million and $1 billion. So you just have to keep pushing on it. Wealth is exponential, not linear. And Greg, it's really great having you.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Kenny.